So, about the Logos. The Logos is this phenomenon that was sort of the centerpiece of Greco-Hellenic spirituality. And what it is it's a voice in the head that people strove to attain for 1,000 years. This was the sine qua non of intellectual accomplishment in the Greco-Roman world. And the Logos told you the right way to live. And this is sort of what you get with psilocybin. You get a voice that can confound you with the depth and brilliance of its answers. And one of the puzzles of trying to understand Greco-Hellenic spirituality is, what were they talking about? And if this ever was a general phenomenon, then what happened to it? Why do we not experience this? This is not well understood. I mean, the rational scholars who have created our vision of Greece basically just don't even want to talk about this. They would rather gloss over it. One of the things that sort of relates to all this is, I think human beings are a lot more malleable than we tend to imagine. In other words, we imagine that people in the distant past or in Greece or somewhere were just like us, except they were living in a different time and place. There's no way to find out, of course, because they're all dead. But there are certain episodes in the evolution of Western culture that suggest that people may be much more plastic than we ordinarily suppose. First example would be, how can it be that in the middle 1500s, perspective was discovered? I mean, how do you discover perspective? This is very hard, I think, for modern people to understand, because it's a given for us. I mean, we see in perspective. We accept it as a quality of the world rather than a cultural artifact put in place at a certain moment. But in fact, during the Renaissance, only the most inspired people could paint in perspective on the natch. Most people, they had complex devices called perspectographs that would project over the scene a receding grid, and then people would essentially fill in the lines. Now, another example of this kind of thing that's not so well known, but that is an example that Marshall McLuhan makes a lot of, is St. Augustine, the great father of the Christian church. He had a reputation for being a very holy man, and the accounts of his contemporaries say that the way people would satisfy themselves that St. Augustine had a pipeline to God is they would bring him scripture, the Bible essentially, and open it in front of him and let him look at it, and then they would close the book and question him about what was there, and he could always tell them. And they were amazed. As far as we can tell, St. Augustine was the only man in Europe who could read silently. Nobody else could do it. It was regarded as a miracle. Now, we all read silently, and there may be a few unfortunate individuals among us who move their lips while they read, but that's the only vestigial trace we have of this previous cultural mode where everyone, to read meant to read aloud. No one could conceive of any other way of doing it. The Logos seems to me a kind of similar thing. It was a mental behavior, function, which for reasons which are probably complex and unknowable, slipped out of reach. That's why it seems to me these psychedelics are very close to being able to modify our behaviors along these kinds of lines, because there are a number of behavioral and experiential possibilities that we suppress. I mean, I think it's just as an example of how little we know about what's going on. look at the don't look at it, but conceive of the Gaffenberg spot, the G spot. Now, we all know what this is. Clearly, people were looking for it for a long, long time. How come they only discovered it 12 years ago? I mean, if something that major can be overlooked, then it's hard to imagine what might have been overlooked. I mean, that's pretty central into the project of being a human being. And apparently it was unknown until very, very recently. So, yes, the logos was probably what I call the Gaian mind. And that at a certain point in cultural development, people just became so chuckle-headed that the Gaian mind just said, well, the hell with this. And then the voice fell silent.